The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back, another edition of Retro Rangers in the Zone. The co-hosts are George Grimm. How are you, George?
I'm fine. Happy
and
to be
Hal
here.
Bock.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, have a great show, guys. Start with you, Hal, and enjoy each other's company as usual.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to discuss tonight the changing face of the National Hockey League. When I first became involved with the league, it was 1961-62 with the Rangers, and it was a six-team league. The Rangers, the Boston Bruins, the Montreal Canadiens, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Chicago Blackhawks, Detroit Red Wings. Six teams, and they played a 70-game schedule. So they were playing each other a lot. And the players, you knew all the players, you knew the rosters, you knew who you were going to see every night because it was a very limited number of teams. And that began to change in the mid-60s, 1967, when the National Hockey League chose to double in size, and the expansion added six teams: Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Minnesota, Los Angeles Kings, and the Oakland Seals. So that gave us a 12-team league. It was the biggest expansion in the history of professional sports. No league had ever doubled in size. And suddenly the NHL had 12 teams. Well, that's like the dark ages, because now, in the year 2019, we've got 31 teams to try to keep track of. And I don't know about you, George, but it's awfully difficult for me. So
it's very hard.
It's very hard.
It's very hard. I grew up in the six-team league myself, and I used to be able to name every player and every number on every team. Now, if you ask me to name all 31, soon to be 32 teams, I would have to sit down and think about it and get out a piece of paper and map it out to see, where the teams were. When the NHL went from 6 to 12 teams, the level of play also went down a little bit.
Yes, it did.
The teams in 1966-67, the year before expansion, the total of goals that the original six teams scored was 1,387. The next year they scored. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. I told you wrong.
No, they had 1252.
1252 the first year, right? And the year after that is 1387.
Correct.
The Rangers scored 226 goals, up 35 from the previous year. Surprisingly enough, the Chicago Blackhawks scored 52 less goals in the year after expansion than they did before expansion. But that was the year that they traded Phil Esposito, Ken Hodge, and Fred Stanfield to the Boston Bruins. So that might have had something to do with it.
Also, Boston's goal total went up to 77 goals more.
Yeah,
and that could be traced to that trade, I guess, right?
That's true. So, and it really hurt the NHL for a while as far as level of play.
Well, I think one thing, I think that they did a smart thing by putting all of the new teams in their own division, and that guaranteed that a new team, one of the expansion teams, would finish first, which was a good thing for that franchise and for that town. And it also guaranteed that one of the expansion teams would play for the Stanley Cup. Mm-hmm. That was not exactly fair, because the expansion teams, as you said, the talent was not up to the level of the old guard of the old teams. Yeah. So as a result, you had a one-sided Stanley Cup final. But other than that, I think it was probably a smart move to put those new teams, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Minnesota, the Kings, the LA Kings, and Oakland, in their own division and keep them away from the established teams who obviously had an advantage over them.
Well, the teams in the original six, before expansion, they played each other 14 times. And then with expansion, they played each other 10 times. They played each of the new teams 4 times. And I think when they played each other so many times a year, 14 times a year, players knew each other and they respected each other more. They kept their sticks down. They had known each other from past seasons. They had a lot of home and home series, so any grudges or bad blood that you had on Saturday night would travel down to Sunday night, and so it was a whole different culture back then too.
Exactly. It was kind of inbred, It was everybody knew everybody else. I remember I said this to somebody at lunch the other day. When I worked for the Rangers in 1961 in the old Garden, the sellout crowd number was 15,925,
right.
And we sold out every night. And I used to boast to the writers, you got to come and cover us. You got to pay attention to us because we have a sellout every night, 15,925. And the writers would say, sure, it's the same 15,925 because they thought that the hockey base here in New York was very limited. Well, I would argue that was not the case. I think hockey has become, was then and is now, a lot stronger than it was, say, during the war years and before.
Oh, sure.
So they argued that it was the same fans. Well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But there were 15,925 fans in that building every night, for which we in the organization were very proud.
Now, in the old days, before expansion, when there were only 6 teams, and the road trips were by train most of the time, and the players spent more time with one another. They played cards, or they tried to sneak beer past the coach, and they were friendly with each other more, as a team and with their opponents. Any research that I did, about the old NHL, I was very surprised how small the NHL world was back then. It seemed like everyone, at some point in their career, growing up as a junior, as a peewee, they, had known each other or played with each other. They all knew each other. It was a family. It was a very small world. Now,
quite true. It's quite
now
true.
you've got over 800 people, 800 players in the league. Where back then you had 120 of the best players. Now you've got close to 800 players from all parts of the world, and you just don't know who the players are anymore. I yield to you on your knowledge of the league as it stands today. I haven't been able to keep up with it. Right.
I just wonder what you think how the level of play compares to the old 6-team league. Is the quality of play as good, better, not as good?
The thing that hurt the level play back then was the World Hockey Association. When I spoke to Emil Francis for my book, We Did Everything But Win, he said after the expansion in 1967, they thought it would take 5 years for the league to get back to where it was. But then the World Hockey League came in and threw everything out of whack. And they never got up to that level, for a long time. Now, there's been so much expansion in a short time that it's really hurt the level of play. You have some teams who are top level, top shelf teams, and then you have a lot of mediocre teams, and it's just not.
Not what we anticipate, what we remember from the old days, right?
Right.
I know. I agree with you. the other night, one night recently, we were watching the late news, and they had the scores, and they said in the NHL, San Jose 4 and Ottawa 2. And my wife said, San Jose has a team? Ottawa has a team? Because she remembers the old days just like I do. But, those teams have been around for 20 years now. So, I mean, you better get used to it, And, for example, Nashville came into New York the other night or the other day and played back-to-back games here in New York against the Rangers and the Islanders, and they scored 7 goals in one and 8 goals in the next. So you gotta give them credit. They came to play, and they can play. And maybe they're not. The game has changed so much, though. And one of the things that I really object to, my son was a goalie. My son played for 7 years as a kid, squirt hockey, and that's that level. And he was a goalie. And along the way, the NHL decided that tie games were no good, that we had to have overtime. And if the overtime ended in a tie, well, we were going to have a shootout, me against you. Well, wait a minute. Did anybody ask the goalies about this? It's not, to me, that's a very unfair way of settling a game. I just don't buy that. The shootout offend me something awful.
Yes. Yeah. It's also, hockey is you have the 6 players on the ice. It's a team game. And at the end, when you have the shootouts 1 against 1, it's not a team win anymore, I mean, the NHL...
It's penalty shots. It's one penalty shot after another.
Yeah. And
the penalty shot is a great moment in a game. It's a very dramatic moment within a game. But to have 8 penalty shots, one after the other, that's not what I consider to be hockey, No,
it's a show. Even how they take the shots, you have a lot of guys being very very fancy with the shots, just to put it one way, and it just isn't anything they would do in a regular game. They wouldn't have that kind of time to stick down like that. But that's the NHL right now.
I guess it's working. I mean, they're selling plenty of tickets.
Yeah.
So I guess the people like it. I mean, I'm old school,
Yeah.
and I like the way the game was when I discovered the game, and I rue the changes. I'm not happy with the changes, but it is what it is. That's the game, and we're going to have 32 teams very soon, and I defy you to name 5 players on the Columbus Blue Jackets. I can't.
No. I think John Tortorella is their coach. And
right.
I think they got Brandon Dubinsky, and that is it. That's, and that's, way back then I could name every player on every team.
Absolutely, and you knew the numbers. Yeah. You also knew every number, right?
Right. And we didn't see those teams that much. The only games we saw on TV were on Channel 9 on Saturday nights with either Bob Wolf or Win Elliott, and we didn't see much of Chicago and Detroit, but we saw a lot of Boston and Toronto and Montreal. But we still knew those players. We knew who they were. Now I should say with all the teams, the Kansas City Scouts and the Atlanta Thrashers. I forgot that they were even part of the NHL at one time when I was making out the timeline. Kansas City Scouts, really?
Yeah.
I forgot. I just didn't remember that they were there. They moved and they became the Colorado Rockies, and then they became the New Jersey Devils, and so there's a lot of movement with these teams too. Because they put teams in places just to have a market there, for TV, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
Well, I think Columbus is a very good example of that. I mean, Columbus has never been considered a major league city in any other sport.
No.
It's a AAA team it had been a AAA team in baseball. The Yankees farm team was in Columbus. They didn't have a football team. They didn't have a basketball team. Why would we put a hockey team in Columbus, of all places?
That's right. Probably because they had a good rink. They put up a good arena, and they wanted to fill it up, Whereas for years and years, they were trying to put a team in Hamilton, because Hamilton, Ontario, had a rink that they built years ago, and it was empty. And they were barred by the Maple Leafs. They wouldn't let them come in because they were too close to Toronto. And so Hamilton never got that NHL team. So,
what's also interesting is, we're sitting here decrying the expansions and the expansion teams. Las Vegas came into the league 2 years ago, and they were in the Stanley Cup Finals. Mm-hmm. They're playing for the Cup. My God. The Rangers in the last 50 years have played for the Cup once. Or twice,
I know. Yes, I know.
I mean,
yeah.
That's remarkable. They put together an expansion team roster, and they almost won the Stanley Cup in their first year.
Yeah. Well, they had to pay $500 million to get into the league, and
as compared to $2 million for the original six expansion teams.
And in 1967, the owners didn't really want the new teams to succeed, so they really limited the players that they would be able to pick from them. But in 2013, I guess, or 15, whenever Las Vegas picked, they were allowed to pick more players. The established teams were only allowed to protect a certain number of players, and they had to protect players who were on the contract. They couldn't leave any players unprotected who were still on the contract, and it just made it harder for the established teams to protect their players, and it made it easier for Las Vegas to feast on what was left.
Well, do you think that the league wanted the newer teams like Las Vegas to have a better shot, to be better, given the experience of those original expansion teams?
Yeah, probably, and they also asked $500 million to get into the league. So you're not gonna ask some owner to plop down that kind of money and not give them some good players. And McPhee, who was the GM of Las Vegas, he picked wisely, and they put together a good team, and things worked out for them. So whether it would happen for Seattle 2 years from now, who knows? But they wanted to ensure that they would have a competitive team. I don't think they ever thought that they would get as far as they did, but they did. So.
But isn't that an embarrassment to some of the teams like the Rangers, who have they're just floating around year after year, mm-hmm. and never really challenging for the Cup, except for the 1 year in 1994,
right?
When they won the Cup. Mm-hmm. That ended a dry spell from 1940, so that's 54 years.
Yeah. And
now we're in 2020. It's coming up 2020. That would be 26 years. So I mean, it's a long time to win the Cup just once over a period of almost 75 years.
Yeah, I know. Well, the Rangers finally did. 2 years ago, they finally said, we're going to rebuild. We're going to cut loose all our high price free agents, try to get some draft picks and young kids in here, and now they're doing the right thing. They're rebuilding because as you looked at the NHL over the last 10, 15 years, the Pittsburgh Penguins have bottomed out, and they came back and won. The Boston Bruins have bottomed out. They came back and won. But the Rangers just never got any further than they were. They were running in sand all those years. And finally, they did what they had to do, what they should have done years ago. Just rebuild. Just say to the fans, hey, listen, this is what it's going to be. We're going to rebuild.
What do
We're
you
going to lose.
what do you think of the internationalization of the league? There are so many players whose names I can't pronounce from Europe that just on every roster.
Well, I always think of Bill Chadwick and how he would have mangled these names these days.
My friend Bill Chadwick, the big whistle.
I mean, I had trouble with the kid on the Rangers, Kako. Whenever I say his name, say his name, I always have to make sure I have my capo in front of my Kako, because it's just hard to grasp some of these names. I mean, growing up, the only hard to pronounce names we had were from Canada. I remember Christian Bordelot and some of the French sounding names that just roll off the tongue.
The French Canadians,
yeah. These names don't roll off your tongue. And I admire somebody like Sam Rosen and guys like that who can just rattle them off.
I find him remarkable. The work he does is remarkable because, as you just said, how do you pronounce these names? I mean, these are mysterious people from Norway and Finland and every place else, and they come to you with names that are not exactly Barry Beck or Roy Gilbert. That's a real challenge.
Yeah, and it's also players who you might see only once a year. If you see a guy,
yes, that's right.
If they play them whatever times a year, 5-6 times a year, and they're on the ice a lot, you say the names over and over again, you get used to it. But you get a guy from San Jose who you might just see once a year, it's hard. But I really applaud those guys who can do that quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
I wouldn't be able to do it. But the league has changed, and we can't go back. And the game has gotten faster. The players have less respect for one another because they don't know each other. I mean, they didn't grow up together. You get a guy from Canada who's playing a guy from Sweden or Czechoslovakia. They don't know each other, and they might not see each other, all year, except for maybe one game or two games. So they're going to do whatever they want to do. There's no repercussions.
How do you feel about the fighting in the games?
I think it's a necessary evil, to a point. I don't see the need for the prearranged fights, where one coach sends out his tough guy and the other coach sends out his, and they fight. It's almost like a prearranged fight. But hockey can be a very frustrating game. A lot of things can happen to throw you off. You lose your edge, you lose the puck bounces, things happen. And sometimes you just, they hit each other and one thing, turns into another. And
it's a contact sport. There's no question about that. It's a collision sport, much like football.
And sometimes,
but one of the things that troubles me about the game is, and I have to confess, I don't watch every game or a lot of games, or from start to finish, but I frequently will tune in and I'll see a fight, and I'll see the linesman stepping away and letting these two guys go at it. Right. Let's break up the fight. Let's get back to the game. And that troubles me a little bit.
Well, they do when one player loses his helmet and the other guy doesn't, or if one guy is pinned down to the ice, and things like that. Anytime that one guy has the advantage, but as long as they're standing up and swinging at each other, the linesmen stay out of the way. So I remember one game, Vic Hadfield was involved in a fight with somebody from, I think, the California Seals. And he swung at him, and he missed him, and he hit the linesman, and he knocked the linesman right down on his butt. So, but no, like I said, the game has changed and it's gotten faster, and that's just the way it is. So
it's I don't, the game was plenty fast when we came along. I think I just I mean, tell me anybody who could skate faster than Bobby Hull. Bobby Hull went down the ice in a flash.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think in a match race he would hold his own, although not today because he's probably 75 years old. But in those days, he was to me he was the fastest guy on the ice. He was just come down the ice and he'd be in your zone in a heartbeat. But I don't know if you have players like that today.
No. When the Rangers had Gene Carr, if you
I remember Gene Carr, sure.
Bill Chadwick once said that Gene Carr couldn't put the puck in the ocean if he was standing at the end of the dock, but he could skate. He was a very fast skater, and I interviewed him for the book, and he told me that the fastest skater he ever went up against was Bobby Orr. He said Bobby Orr
revolutionized the game. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
When Bobby Orr came up, defensemen didn't play the way Bobby Orr played.
No.
And so he revolutionized the game, and not badly. I mean, for a good thing. It was a good thing,
right.
Because it became a 5-man rush instead of a 3-man rush.
Right.
And maybe the goalies weren't thrilled with it, but it became more of an offensive game with Bobby Orr.
Yeah. But he could skate very fast. Emil Francis used to put Gene Carr on him to watch him, on the ice, and Carr said he would be matching him stride for stride, and he would look back to see where the play was, and Bobby Orr would just take off. At that moment, he would take off. He had like afterjets in his skates.
Yeah.
Just skate right off, and he wouldn't catch
one
up
of the most famous goals and most famous pictures that we have from the Stanley Cup playoffs, I guess it was 71 or thereabouts, and the Bruins were playing the St. Louis Blues.
That's right.
And Glenn Hall was in goal for the Blues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and Bobby Orr broke in. I think it may have been in overtime. And he broke in toward the net, and he was pitchforked by Noel Picard. Noel Picard got his stick between Orr's legs and put him up in the air. And Orr got the shot off, and it scored the winning goal in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And there's a brilliant picture of that particular play, which I thought kind of captured the essence of the excitement of what the NHL can be or could be in those days.
Right.
And Bobby Orr was a game changer. There's no question about that.
No.
Hey, we have Christmas coming up. A week from today is Christmas Day.
Yes. All right.
And I don't know what the schedule reads. Are the Rangers playing?
The Rangers are playing Christmas Eve. No, the Rangers are playing New Year's Eve in Edmonton.
New Year's Eve, okay.
In their 93-year history, the Rangers have only played 5 games on Christmas Eve, and they're 3-0-2. Christmas Day, they played 38 games, 25-11-2. The last time they played on Christmas Day was 1971.
That's pretty good.
New Year's Eve is a busy day for the Rangers. They have played 55 games. They're 27, 21-7. And New Year's Day, they have played 32 games. They're 10, 20-2. At one point there in the 50s, the Rangers and the Bruins played a lot of home and homes on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. They would play New Year's Eve at Madison Square Garden and New Year's Day at the Boston Garden. And the Rangers would win most of those games at home, but they would lose up in Boston Garden on New Year's Eve. So that train ride up to Boston after the game on New Year's Eve must have been quite a ride. Because they lost a lot of those games. So.
I remember doing an interview once at Jones Beach with the great Guy Lombardo. Guy Lombardo was very famous for playing on New Year's Eve.
Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians.
That's correct. And Lombardo told me that he would go to the game at Madison Square Garden and then go to the Hotel Roosevelt or wherever he was playing that night and get there in time to, serenade in the new year. So that was a big thing for him. New Year's Eve.
Well, the years that I had the season seats for the Rangers. They had games on New Year's Eve. Some years, and boy, they were hard to get rid of. Nobody wanted them because I didn't want to go, and nobody wanted those games. And it always ended up there was this guy in the mailroom down in the bank I used to work in, and he always would take them, and I was just glad to give them to him because it was hard to get over there. New Year's Eve.
The players probably weren't thrilled to play on New Year's Eve either.
No,
but that's the schedule, and you follow the schedule.
Yeah. The players are away from their homes, and everyone who works in the garden and on the network, they're all away from their families on these days, and it's really not fair. But
well, it's that's what it is to be a professional athlete.
Yeah.
You sign on for that, and you just have to follow the schedule, and they got to get the games in, and they also have to get the customers in. So they do what they have to do.
Right.
But we started this conversation about the 6-team league. I miss the 6-team league, George. I really do. I loved it. I loved the 6-team league. I loved what we remember, knowing the rosters, knowing every player inside and out. I remember I would go into the Garden, and we would be playing the Canadians. And we used to have, my office was inside the arena. So we had a door from our office that led you right into the upper balcony of the arena. And so we would walk through. I'd walk through that door during the warm-ups for a game, and I'd look down. The Canadians would be in town, and I'd look down and say to myself, please let it be Charlie Hodge in goal. Don't let it be Jacques Plante. And I'd look down, and there would be Plante with his mask, and I'd say, oh, God, Gump has got to play a shutout tonight.
That's right, because the Rangers wouldn't score.
So those were great days, and I don't know that this modern league can replicate that feeling.
No.
Not for me. It's just not the same game.
No. In those old days too, the Rangers and the Bruins always fought for 5th and 6th place.
Yes,
and
that's right.
They also fought for the Patrick Cup, which was a imaginary trophy that was made up by the writers because Muzz Patrick was the GM of the Rangers, and Lynn Patrick, his brother, was the coach of the Boston Bruins, and they used to fight for this cup that really didn't exist.
Imaginary cup, huh?
Right, but
probably a coffee cup.
Yes, an empty coffee cup. And the thing I want to do now is pass along some information about former Ranger Mark Pavlich. Now, Mark has fallen on some really hard times, and he's currently 61 years old. And in August of 2019, he was arrested after assaulting and injuring a neighbor who he was fishing with. He was charged with 4 felony counts, and including having a firearm with the serial number altered. And in October, he was found incompetent of being able to stand trial. The judge ruled that he lacked the ability to consult with his counsel or to understand what was going on in the procedures, and he was ruled to be a danger to himself and others. So he's currently in a hospital, and his sister said that she thinks it comes from CTE, which is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and that she had noticed some changes in his behavior after a while, over the past few years.
That's a shame because before he became a Ranger, he was a key member of the Miracle on Ice team.
That's
the
right.
1980 Olympics that won the gold medal.
Yeah.
Very memorable team and a very memorable tournament up in Lake Placid. during the Olympics, and Mark was a key man on that team, and that's a tragic story that you tell.
Yeah, and then he came to the Rangers, and he was here for 5 years. He scored 133 goals. Then he moved to Minnesota for a season, and he moved to San Jose for a season, and he played in Europe for a while, and then he's been out of hockey since then, of course.
Yeah.
And his former captain Barry Beck has been in touch with him, trying to keep his spirits up. Barry lives in Hong Kong now, and he's been calling him and trying to keep him in good spirits. And Barry Beck has given out his address if anybody wants to write to Mark, send him a card, send him well wishes. His address is St. Peter Regional Treatment Center, 2100 Shepherd Drive in St. Peter, Minnesota, 56082. And if you want to send him a card, write him a letter, maybe send him some old Ranger programs that he might have been featured in, he might appreciate it. Keep his spirits up. And he was very low key when he was here, so it's a surprise that he would snap and have that kind of a reaction to whatever it is that set him off, because he's very low key here.
Yeah.
But,
well, hopefully during the holiday season, people will reach out to him and help him get along. This has been a fun conversation, George, and look forward to the next one.
Okay, Hal. Talk to you soon.
All right.
And happy holidays, happy Hanukkah.
Thank you, and you too, and good health.
Merry Christmas. Yeah, Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy New Year, and we'll see you in the new year.
Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a comfortably zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.